Hello, welcome again to this new episode. In this lesson, we are going to explore more on the colors. In the previous lesson, we saw how we perceive colors through our eyes and how our brain interprets colors. And we also saw that we perceived colors on objects based on the pigments they have, either natural pigment or man-made pigment. This allows us to separate the light spectrum and perceive just part of the spectrum, and that gives things the colors we see, either green, blue, red, and other things. So today we are going to explore more possibilities, more of the color properties. So we have seen that we actually see colors. We know how we see colors. So we also can realize that as you look at things around you, they are not appearing the same way. So it means colors can behave. So that's what we call the color properties. Colors can actually change. They can be manipulated. So we are going through to see some of these manipulations that can be made in the colors. So the first thing we need to look at is we have three main categories when we classify colors. The first category is what we call the primary colors. The primary colors, of course, if we stay in what we call the Rgb color model, because we have different color models. So we'll stick to the Rgb initially. So when we take the Rgb color model, we actually have three main categories, which is the primary colors, secondary colors, and tertiary colors. And what are the primary colors? Like you can see on the screen right now, the primary colors, and like the model name says, is the red, green, and blue. So that's why we call that color model the Rgb. So red, green, blue, these are the primary colors. What it means is these colors cannot be obtained through combination of other colors in this model. So primary, the red, the Rgb, these colors are naturally pure, so you cannot actually generate them by combining three of other colors to come up with it. So that's why they are called the primary colors. And the secondary colors are actually colors born out of the combination of two primary colors. So when you combine two primary colors, the color you obtain is called a secondary color. So when we look at this example right now, we can see that when we combine the red and the green, we end up with the yellow. The green and the blue, we end up with the cyan, and then the blue and the red, we end up with the magenta. And then we get the secondary colors. And these secondary colors are in the CMYK model, what we call the primary colors. So in the CMYK model, these are the primary colors. So as you can see, CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, magenta, and the K in that case is for black. Because when you combine these three colors together, you end up getting black. And that's why this color model is used in the printing. So you can see when you are designing, at some point, you have to change your color mode from Rgb, which is well understood by the screens, into the CMYK color model, which is well understood by the printers, by the ink. And the difference is the Rgb color is what we call an additive color model, because you add colors to get new colors. But in the CMYK model, you subtract colors. So you mix the pigments, and then the pigments will eliminate some parts of the spectrum of the colors, and you end up with new colors. So I've jumped to this point, but I believe I don't want us to go too deep into that, so I will just mention these two main color models right for now. Then the tertiary colors are obtained in the Rgb model by mixing one primary color and then one secondary color. So we saw our secondary colors here, which are here, down here, and then the primary colors here. So when we mix the primary colors with any secondary color, we get what we call the tertiary colors. So that brings us to what usually people call the color wheel. So if you continue to do that, so let me ignore this part for now. So basically, if you continue to do that, you end up with a circle. So let me try to make that happen quickly so that you see what we are talking about here. So I'll take the primary colors, I'll make a copy of them here. So I'll just split them like this, left and right, in order to get some kind of pyramid, right? So let me get it a bit down, lower. So these are my primary colors, and you can see our secondary colors. This, when we combine the red and the orange, the green, we get the yellow. So I can take it and put it in between here. When we combine the green and the blue, we get the cyan. So green and blue, we get cyan. So I can take the cyan and put it in between here. When we combine the blue and the red, we get magenta. So I can take the magenta and bring it here. So you see, I end up getting a pyramid of the colors. So the same thing can happen when you arrange them in the circle. So now you do the combination of each one of these combinations, then you get the tertiary colors and all this. So you end up with what we call a color wheel. So it's usually represented in a circular way. So I would have made it in a circular way, but for this small wheel, I think I prefer using the rectangle shape. All right, so I prefer using the rectangular shape. Nonetheless, let me bring a color wheel for us to see. So if I bring in the color wheel like these guys, so let me remove this circle. So I will deal with a real color wheel. So something like that. So you can see our primary colors, which is the blue here, are the red here, and then the green here. So in between you can see the combinations that are gotten. So here you can also see that there are some little differences between the colors. For example, when you take my green, it looks shinier than their green here. So that takes us to the next topic in this course, which is the different shades of the light, or the different shades of the color. When you take one particular color, it can have different shades, which is either the color has more light or it has less light. So this is an example here. I've made this example with the red color, where I took it, the initial color here, which is the shiniest among them. Then to this shiniest, I added about 10%, 10%, 10%. I removed 10%, 10%, 10% of light. So in the first square here, I removed 10% of light in the main red. Then the second one, I removed 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, and then up to 100%, 90%. So if I do 100%, then we'll end up with white. So I actually changed the shade of the color. So I did the same thing by rather adding shadow. So I added the contrast in the color. So I actually removed the light from the image, the color. So you can see as you remove light from a color, it becomes darker, and as you add light, it becomes lighter. Right? So these are what we call the color characteristics, the color properties. So normal colors, basic colors, default colors like you see them here are called what we call the hues, H-U-E. They are the hues, so they are basic hues. A hue can be affected and bring out of it more other variation of colors. So by adding either the intensity or by adding more value, so you add more light or less light, and you get different versions of the color. Alright, now when you look at this color wheel, you can notice something very interesting, which is when you look at this area, for example, like this, the colors in this area seem to be very hot. It looks really like fire, like hot. And then in this area, you could notice that the colors, this area here, the colors actually look warm. So actually like the heat is cooling down. So kind of the fire that's quenching slowly, or you can imagine having an iron inside fire, and then it actually heats high and goes to this level of color, and then as it cools down, it starts to migrate to such level of color. And in the other side of the colors, you could also see that the colors here seem a bit cool. So they are kind of really quiet but cool. But under here in this area, the colors look cooler. They are really cold. So here is cool and here is cold. So you can here say hot. Here we have warm. Here we have cold. Then here we have cool. So these are what we call the color temperatures, right? So it is actually a feeling based on things we know in the nature, things we observe in the nature, and things how nature actually paints things to our eyes. So for example, when you see fire, automatically you know it has this kind of colors in the hot area there. So it's not like somebody sat down and just decided to say, okay, these colors are hot. It's actually naturally how nature paints things and how we perceive them in life. Colors are actually one of the biggest topics in art. It's one of the biggest topics in life in general. It is almost impossible to say exactly what it is, and it is a very large topic. And for example, when you have colors on your computer, you cannot say that you will get the same colors and while you are printing. It is almost impossible to generate colors on computers and then get them printed exactly with the same values on physical support. So it becomes interesting to study colors, and it becomes almost impossible to finish studying colors. So what we do here is to brush up a little bit on top in order to have a small idea of it. And now you might ask, why do we actually study this different variation of colors? Why do we study different types of colors? The main reason is when we are designing, we use many colors to design, or even if you are using one color, you might work with different shades of that color or different tints of that color. So it is important for you to actually have a clear idea of the colors, how they interact with each other, how you can combine them and give them meaning. So for example, when you are making something, you are designing something that is supposed to excite people, that is supposed to be more of joy and enjoyment and excitement, it is interesting, it will be good to have you using the hot colors, right? So if you are designing something that is supposed to represent the night, it's supposed to represent the evening or something like that, it will be great if you go with cool or cold colors. And the same thing would occur with the warm colors. So if you are to represent a pot on fire, then warm colors might help in that. Or also imagine if you have to design a pot on fire, and you also have to make you also have to show the fire. So definitely the fire will use the hot colors, and then the pot might get the warm colors. So this is interesting. It becomes really important that we start thinking of color harmonies when we are designing. That's why it is key that we take our time to study a little bit of colors. So I showed you the color wheel on an image. So let's have a look at a color wheel on our software and these possibilities of combining colors, because there's something we call the color palette when you are designing. Usually we define a set of colors. We decide to say, okay, maybe the client even gives it to us and say, okay, in this work, I would like you to be using such colors. So these colors mentioned that must be used in the color are what we call the color palette. So for example, if I am to design something that is for children, so like a children garden and something like that, the place owner might ask me to use the primary colors because they are very shiny for children. So that's why you could see in schools, the painting, the tiles, and then the toys and everything children use are usually painted in this red, green, blue, yellow. And you can see they are very sharp. So this is why it is important for you to understand the colors and also the philosophies behind the colors. Because once you know that, okay, I need to harmonize my colors, you need to find a reason to harmonize color. You need to find reasons behind you putting one or two colors together. Why should I use red instead of yellow? Why should I use violet instead of blue? And so on and so forth. So these are the reasons you have to put behind, and that's what we call the philosophy of colors. And the philosophy of colors depends on who you are, the environment where you are, the culture in which you are, it depends a lot. So I personally don't like to say this color means happiness, this color means, and so on and so forth, because from one region to another, things might be different. From one group of people to another, it might be different. So whatever group you find yourself in designing, make sure you understand their color philosophies. So for example, in some places, in some countries, wearing a red t-shirt means you are announcing that you had a very, very hot death, which means a young person, somebody died in a very bad circumstances that is shocking. In other places, having a red color means exciting appetite. It's a good thing to excite appetite. It's also a good news. Like in China, for example, the red represents joy and New Year. So it is very important that you consider how you do your design. And if you are going in the international plan, you also need to consider how you do your philosophy on your colors. So going back to why we need to pay attention to our color harmonies for the color palettes we choose. So going back to our color palettes, the color palettes actually allow us to harmonize our artwork. So when we use the color palette, we are sure we are not ever going beyond the defined environment in terms of colors. So we can never misuse colors, because if you don't define these limitations through a palette, you might be tempted to go beyond the basic colors and then start mixing much more colors, and your art becomes really complicated. So a color palette is important, and making a color palette for your work is also a different level of art when it comes to colors. So let's look at it. For example, if I want to design, I could just decide to say, okay, I'm going with the primary colors, like I said, for the kids garden. I could go with that. I could also decide to say, okay, I'm going with the secondary colors, or I could just go with the tertiary colors. An example of a business that uses the primary colors, typically the primary colors, is Gogo. So when you look at Gogo's logo, they use typically the primary colors, right? The same thing when you look at eBay, they use primary colors, but with a little bit of different shades. So it is important that you brand yourself, or the person you are working for has an idea of how to brand their business or their work with the colors. So how many colors should you use for your palette? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? Honestly, there's no particular number. It's up to you. I see businesses that use one color and use different shades of the same color. People use 2 colors and use different shades of the same colors. Some use 2, 3, 4. Sometimes, depending on the artwork, you can even go up to 10 if you are drawing a whole huge artwork. So it's up to you and up to your intentions. So the question now is, what are some of these techniques people use in creating their color palettes? Because the colors are almost limitless. So it is impossible to say exactly how many possibilities of color palettes you can come up, and that makes it interesting for you, because you can now come up with a color palette that maybe contains colors that somebody else has not used, and making your work therefore unique. So when we look at our Adobe Illustrator, it gives us, of course with Photoshop as well, they give us some of these options which allow us to work with different color palettes. So let me get some space around here. So here we go. So let me make a shape just like that in case I might need it. And then you come to colors here. So when you see this, so my mouse is, so you see colors guide, the color guide here. If you don't see it here, go into your Windows menu, you might see it there. So when you come to this color guide, you can see that you have different color palettes already set for you, and these color palettes have names. So for example, they call this one complementary color palette. A complementary color palette is a color palette. A complementary color palette is a palette in which 2 colors are opposite in the color wheel. So what that means is, if you take this orange, yellow, the complementary color is the blue, violet. So they are opposite. They complement each other. So taking that, you can come here, edit colors. So it means you want to use two colors in your work. That's what is called complementary colors. So it will help you, Adobe Illustrator will help you choose two complementary colors. So when you open the color editor from the color guide, you could see it gives you a wheel, and this wheel you can change its form. So you have three different types of wheels here. So here you have just like the one we have here, but with more options. And you can see the light is reduced on this color, on these colors. So the lighting is reduced. I can adjust the lighting like this. You see, I can add light or reduce light on the colors, and I would like the light to be full 100%. So now, since they are complementary colors, you can see that it will pick one color in one direction and then pick the color on the opposite direction. So if I turn that, it will still be opposite colors. It might be with different saturation or same saturation or different level of saturation, would I say. So you can see if I pick the yellow here, the complementary color is the violet, just like we saw here. So something orangish and then violet. So this is one way of choosing. So if you know your palette is going to be two colors, you can use this wheel to generate. So let's look at the other aspect. So you have the two colors it gives you, and you can change them by clicking on this small box here. Then you choose the different types, but it will take the complementary one around, and you can adjust them. So I love this one because it makes me see the colors properly. So you can see you can adjust the saturation of one and keep the other one well saturated. So this is one way with working with complementary colors. And once you choose it, no, I don't want to save. So I can now use it in my artwork. So I take my object, I change the colors. You see, I make the second object, and then I apply the other color. So these two colors are complementary. It can harmonize my work. It can create more beauty on my work. So let me remove the stroke. So this is one way. So the other way too is we have more other options in different types of combining colors. So if you go back to this color palette, and we can see complementary 2. So this one comes with, I think 4 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors. So you can see this is a palette with 6 colors, and as you move it, it will move them to get you the equivalent colors. I don't know all the rules behind this, but this is one way too. So you can see split complementary, and you can see how it shows. So instead of it to get 2 complementary colors, but it gets 2 instead of getting just 1 complementary color, it gets 2, but with an interval, I think, of 1 among them. So I can choose either 1 or 2, and that makes it really interesting. So you have these various types of color combinations that can help you. So analogies and so many other options. So like shades, triads, so many. Pentagram, right? So pentagram, so you can see it gives you something like that. So with that, you can come up with your own color palette that is adequate for the design you are about to work on, right? So we'll not dig too much into colors, and I guess you have the chance to go through research on your own and get more knowledge about colors, color philosophies, color harmonies, color combinations, and other things. What we are going to do is, from now on, we are going to try to be as conscious as possible in how we use our colors for whatever design we are about to do. So thank you so much for watching this video, and see you in the next lesson.